All right. We are going to dive back into genetics. And finish up this chapter here. Okay, so we talked about incomplete dominance with blending, codominance with blood types. Now we're going to talk about a couple of different instances that are a little bit more complex than what Mendel dealt with. Pleiotropy is when you have one gene affecting many different phenotypes, like dwarfism and sickle cell anemia. Epistasis is when we have one gene affecting another gene. Polygenic inheritance is when you have many genes affecting one phenotype. Make sure you know the definitions of all of these words on this slide. And then we also have nature versus nurture, where, for example, hydrangea plants, their flower color is determined by the pH of the soil that they grow in. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So pleiotropy is when one gene affects more than one phenotypic character, and most genes are pleiotropic. Let me just check something real quick. Oh, we're good. Okay. Sorry about that. So when one gene affects more than one phenotypic character, and you can have wide-ranging effects due to just one single gene. So examples here are dwarfism and gigantism. Epistasis is when one gene alters another gene. So coat color in mice is determined by two separate genes. So there is the pigment color gene, which is black is dominant to brown. And then there's the pigment production gene, where pigment production is dominant to no pigment production. But when we do our heterozygote cross for this dihybrid cross, okay, our homozygous recessive little c actually overrides any color genotype. So instead of getting the ratio 9:3:1, we end up with the ratio 9:3:4 because that production color gene overrides the actual color itself. Another example of polygenic inheritance is skin color. And this is where we have an additive effect of two or more genes on a single phenotype. So here, in terms of phenotypes, okay, this is what we have for phenotypes. And we're looking at like six skin color alleles here that determine the darkness of your skin. And so you can see that there's a very wide distribution here in terms of that. Oops. No. This video, we're not going to watch it right now, but you should watch it. It is really, really great and informative. So nature versus nurture. What was I talking about there? So this is when the phenotype is controlled by both environment and your genes. So like our skin color as humans is influenced by both genetics and environmental conditions. So for example, how much sun you're exposed to and how often is going to help determine the color of your skin just as much as your genes. Coat color in our Arctic foxes is triggered, the color change is triggered by heat sensitive genes. Which makes sense, right? They need to change to their fur color to match their environment in the winter. So when these genes sense lack of heat, they get triggered to express, and then the fox changes its fur color. And then we have that example of the hydrangea. So recessive diseases are where we have alleles coding for either a malfunctioning protein or no protein at all. And so the affected individuals are homozygous recessive, and heterozygotes are carriers. So they have one normal allele that produces enough of the required protein that they normally don't end up with the severe effects of the disease. An example here is cystic fibrosis. This is where a normal allele codes for a membrane protein that transports calcium and water across the cell membrane. there's one amino acid deleted in this protein, and it leads to thicker and stickier mucus coats around cells and mucus buildup in the pancreas, lungs, digestive tract, and this causes diseases, though they are protected against cholera. Tay-Sachs is another recessive disease where you have an enzyme that doesn't work to break down lipids in the brain. And as a result, seizures, blindness, and degeneration of motor skills and mental performance usually start, and then death occurs usually before the age of 5. Sickle cell anemia strikes about 1 in 400 African Americans, and this is where you have your blood cells, your sickle cell hemoglobin actually crystallizes into these long rods or these sickle-type cells. And it's the product of it's a deformed protein product. And this disease is caused by a single substitution of an amino acid in the hemoglobin protein and has what we call pleiotropic effects. We'll get to that in a moment. If you look at the prevalence of malaria and sickle cell anemia, they overlap quite well. And if you look at, we're talking about sickle cell right now, if you're recessive, you have it, but you actually are not going to catch malaria. And same thing for if you are a carrier of sickle cell, you will not get malaria. This is known as the heterozygote advantage. So this is where you have both normal and mutant hemoglobins being synthesized. And so your heterozygote appears healthy here. And that heterozygote advantage is that they are not necessarily sick, because they also have that functional protein and they're protected against malaria. Here is a look at the pleiotropic effects of sickle cell anemia on the body. So those sickled cells cause, for example, clumping and clogging of cells in blood vessels, which can lead to pain, and fever, and brain damage or heart failure, which and some of these things can lead to paralysis, other infections, and things of that nature. So this is, again, where we have one instance of something having drastic effects on many other phenotypes. Now, Huntington's disease is an example of dominant inheritance where there is a mutation in the glutamine amino acid, and this causes a buildup of this Huntington protein in neurons. And the symptoms are memory loss, muscle tremors, and death about 10 to 20 years after disease onset. Here is a way to do some practice with inheritance of dwarfism. And lastly, I think. We've kind of touched a little bit on incest, but we usually have laws and cultural taboos that forbid marriages between close relatives. Why is that? Well, it has to do with genetics. It's usually pretty unlikely that two people that are unrelated carrying the same rare allele will meet and mate, which would increase the prevalence of that rare disease in the population. But matings between close relatives who do have those alleles increases that risk. So if you share a recent common ancestry with someone, you are more likely to carry the same recessive alleles and produce offspring with recessive diseases. Okay, I will see y'all in chapter 13.